Standing in the obsidian throne chamber of the Zephyrian Empire, Marcus Webb was beginning to suspect that his diplomatic training had somehow failed to cover the most important rule of interspecies relations. Never make jokes during formal ceremonies when you don't fully understand the language. The chamber itself was a masterpiece of crystalline architecture that seemed to bend light into impossible configurations, making Queen Astralith appear to be sitting on a throne carved from concentrated starlight. Her appearance was striking even by Zephyrian standards, humanoid in basic structure, but with skin that held an opalescent quality and ears that tapered to elegant points, giving her an otherworldly grace that made Marcus acutely aware of his own mundane humanity. "The right of titles is a sacred tradition," she was explaining, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate directly in his chest cavity, "whereby visiting dignitaries receive ceremonial names that define their relationship to the crown and their standing within our court." "Understood, Your Majesty," Marcus replied, trying to project the kind of confidence that would make his superiors back on Earth proud. "I'm honored to participate in your customs." What he didn't mention was that he was also terrified of accidentally triggering an interstellar incident through cultural incompetence. His briefing materials had been thorough on military protocols and trade negotiations, but surprisingly vague on the specifics of Zephyrian naming ceremonies. The titles available to human liaisons are Honored Friend of the Crown, Distinguished Representative of Terra, or Bearer of Messages Between Worlds. Queen Astralith gestured with one graceful hand, and holographic symbols appeared in the air above the throne. Each carries different privileges and responsibilities within our legal framework. Marcus studied the floating text, which his translation implant was rendering into something that looked like bureaucratic poetry. "Those are all quite formal, Your Majesty. Do I have to choose one of those specific options?" "The tradition allows for creative interpretation, provided the chosen title reflects the dignity of both parties and the solemnity of the occasion." Something in her tone suggested she was enjoying this considerably more than protocol required. Marcus had noticed over the past few days of negotiations that the Queen possessed what could charitably be described as a mischievous sense of humor, and what could less charitably be described as a dangerous tendency to find amusement in watching him navigate cultural confusion. "In that case," he said, grinning with the kind of confidence that would definitely get him court-martialed if this went wrong, "how about my husband?" The silence that followed was so profound that Marcus could hear the quantum harmonics of the crystalline walls, adjusting to accommodate the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure, as approximately 200 court officials all held their breath simultaneously. Queen Astralith's expression went through several distinct phases: surprise, confusion, something that might have been delight, and finally settling into what appeared to be carefully controlled panic. That is," she began, then stopped, consulting what appeared to be a holographic reference manual that materialized beside her throne. Her opalescent skin shifted through several subtle color changes that Marcus was learning to interpret as emotional responses. "Is there a problem, Your Majesty?" he asked, suddenly aware that every being in the chamber was staring at him with expressions ranging from shock to what looked suspiciously like admiration. "Marcus Webb of Terra," Queen Eth said, her voice taking on the formal cadences of legal pronouncement, "you have invoked the consort title of binding partnership. By the ancient laws of our people, your chosen designation carries the full weight of matrimonial contract." "I'm sorry, what now? You have just proposed marriage to the crown of Zephyr." The chamber erupted in what could generously be described as controlled chaos. Court officials began conferring in rapid undertones. Holographic displays lit up with what appeared to be legal precedents, and several beings who looked like they might be reporters began speaking urgently into recording devices. "I was making a joke," Marcus said weakly. "A very bad joke, apparently." The right of titles does not recognize the concept of humor in matters of legal binding, the Queen replied, though something in her expression suggested she was fighting to keep a straight face. Your statement has been recorded in the official chronicles and witnessed by the assembled court. Can I take it back? Not without formal rejection from the Crown. She leaned forward slightly, and her voice dropped to tones that somehow managed to be both intimate and terrifyingly official. Marcus Webb of Terra, do you withdraw your proposal of consort binding? The question hung in the air like a live grenade with the pin pulled. Marcus realized that everyone in the chamber was waiting for his response, and that his answer would likely determine the future of human-Zephyrian relations for the foreseeable future. What happens if I don't withdraw it? Then by the laws of succession and the ancient codes of partnership, you become my acknowledged consort-elect, with all the rights and responsibilities that status entails. And what happens if I do withdraw it? Then you will have publicly rejected the crown of Zephyr in front of the assembled court, which, while legally permissible, would be considered diplomatically unfortunate. Marcus looked around the chamber, taking in the expectant faces of beings whose political allegiances he couldn't begin to guess at. The flickering holographic displays showing what appeared to be live news feeds from across the Zephyrian Empire, and the Queen herself, whose expression was carefully neutral but whose eyes held something that might have been hope. Your Majesty, he said carefully, hypothetically speaking, what does being consort-elect actually involve? Participation in court ceremonies, advisory privileges on matters of interspecies policy, access to royal residential quarters, and... She paused, her skin shifting to colors that suggested embarrassment. Eventual formalization of the partnership bond through public oath-taking. Public oath-taking, a ceremony somewhat more elaborate than the right of titles, involving formal declarations of mutual commitment before the assembled representatives of both our worlds. Both our worlds? Marcus, she said, dropping the formal address for the first time since he'd known her. Your joke has just made you the first human ever to be legally engaged to Zephyrian royalty. Earth will need to be notified. He felt his knees develop a sudden and concerning interest in the concept of structural failure. They're going to court-martial me. They're going to make you the most important human in diplomatic history, she corrected. Assuming, of course, that you don't withdraw the proposal. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since this conversation had started. Queen Astrelith was brilliant, beautiful, possessed of a sense of humor that matched his own, and had spent the past 3 days treating him as an intellectual equal rather than a primitive representative of a less advanced species. The idea of being married to her was both terrifying and oddly appealing. The idea of explaining this to his superiors was purely terrifying. What would you prefer, Your Majesty? What I would prefer, she said, her voice taking on harmonics that seemed to bypass his ears entirely and speak directly to something deeper, is irrelevant to matters of state policy. But if it weren't irrelevant, her smile was radiant enough to power a small city. Then I would tell you that your joke was the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. Marcus woke up in what were apparently the royal guest quarters, though guest quarters seemed insufficient to describe rooms that were larger than most Earth apartments and furnished with what looked like crystallized music. The morning light filtering through windows that definitely hadn't been designed with human visual systems in mind, painted everything in shades that his brain insisted couldn't actually exist. Good morning, Consort-elect Webb, announced a voice that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Her Majesty requests your presence for the morning court session at your earliest convenience. Right, Marcus said to the room in general. Consort-elect, that's going to take some getting used to. The previous evening had been a blur of hastily arranged communications with Earth, emergency diplomatic protocols, and the gradual realization that his joke had accidentally triggered the most significant development in human-Zephyrian relations since first contact. His superior's response had been predictably bureaucratic. Maintain the status quo, gather intelligence, and try not to cause any additional interstellar incidents. The morning's wardrobe selection had apparently been handled by someone with strong opinions about how consort-elects should present themselves. The clothes were elegant, clearly expensive, and definitely not designed for someone whose fashion sense peaked at clean uniform, pressed flat. The clothing incorporates adaptive fibers that respond to the wearer's biometrics, the room explained helpfully. They will adjust to optimal comfort and appearance parameters automatically. Of course they will, Marcus muttered, studying his reflection in a mirror that seemed to be providing subtle lighting adjustments to make him look more photogenic. Because nothing about this situation is remotely normal. The walk to the morning court gave him time to appreciate the architectural impossibilities of the Zephyrian palace. Corridors that seemed to extend infinitely in some directions, while compressed space in others. Chambers that were somehow larger on the inside than the outside, and decorative elements that appeared to respond to his emotional state by shifting colors and patterns. Marcus, Queen Astralith's voice carried across the throne chamber with what sounded like genuine pleasure. She was conducting what appeared to be a routine court session, reviewing petitions, arbitrating disputes, making administrative decisions, but her face lit up when she saw him approaching. "Your Majesty," he replied, attempting a bow that felt slightly less awkward than his previous efforts. "You wanted to see me. I want you to understand what you've gotten yourself into," she said, gesturing for him to join her on the elevated platform where the throne sat. "The morning court is where we handle the day-to-day business of ruling an interstellar empire. As consort-elect, you have advisory privileges on all matters." Advisory privileges. You're entitled to observe all proceedings, offer opinions on policy decisions, and participate in strategic planning sessions. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to conversational tones. "You're also entitled to ask questions, which I strongly encourage, since human perspectives on Zephyrian governance might prove illuminating." The next hour was a fascinating glimpse into the complexities of managing a civilization that spanned multiple star systems. Trade disputes between mining colonies, territorial disagreements with neighboring species, resource allocation for terraforming projects, and what appeared to be a heated debate about the artistic merits of different architectural styles for the new embassy on Kepler 438b. The humans would probably prefer more rectangular geometries, Marcus observed during a lull in the architectural discussion. Our psychology tends to associate angular shapes with stability and reliability. Noted, Queen Eth replied, making what appeared to be an official notation on her holographic displays. "Any other thoughts on human aesthetic preferences? We're generally suspicious of things that are too beautiful. If something looks too good to be true, we assume it probably is." Interesting. And how does that philosophy apply to diplomatic relationships? Marcus realized she wasn't just asking about architecture anymore. It means we tend to be cautious about offers that seem too generous, partnerships that seem too beneficial, and situations that seem too convenient. Such as accidentally becoming engaged to an alien queen through mistranslated humor. Exactly like that. Her laughter was musical enough to make the crystalline walls resonate in harmony. "I can understand the suspicion. From an outside perspective, this situation must seem remarkably coincidental." The thought had occurred to me. "Marcus, may I ask you something personal? Given that we're apparently engaged, I suppose personal questions are permitted. What did you think of me before yesterday? Before the joke, I mean. During our negotiations." The question caught him off guard, partly because it was unexpectedly direct, and partly because he'd been trying not to think about it too closely. "Honestly. Especially honestly. I thought you were the most impressive person I'd ever met. Brilliant, funny, capable of thinking about problems from angles I never would have considered." He paused, aware that everyone in the chamber was pretending not to listen while obviously hanging on every word. I also thought you were completely out of my league, and probably just being polite to the primitive human diplomat. Out of your league. Your Majesty, you rule an interstellar empire. I'm a mid-level liaison officer, whose biggest previous assignment was mediating a trade dispute over coffee beans. Coffee beans are important, she said seriously. The foundation of diplomatic breakfast meetings across known space. You're making fun of me. I'm pointing out that competence is competence, regardless of scale. The skills required to mediate successfully between different groups with conflicting interests don't fundamentally change whether you're dealing with coffee producers or interstellar empires. Is that why you accepted my joke proposal? Because you think I'm competent at mediation? Her expression grew more serious, and her skin shifted to colors that suggested she was choosing her words carefully. I accepted your proposal because in 3 days of negotiations, you treated me like a person first and a queen second. You asked questions about my interests, remembered details about my preferences, and made me laugh more than anyone has in years. Those aren't exactly qualifications for marriage. Marcus, I've had 17 formal marriage proposals from various galactic dignitaries over the past 5 years. Every single one was submitted through proper diplomatic channels, accompanied by detailed analyses of political benefits, and written by committees of advisors who had never met me. She gestured at the assembled court around them. Your joke was the first marriage proposal I've ever received that was actually directed at me rather than at my crown. Even if it was an accident. Especially because it was an accident. It means it came from you, not from political calculation. The morning session continued with Marcus gradually, becoming more comfortable offering observations and suggestions. The other court officials seemed to accept his presence with good grace, and several of them began directing questions specifically toward him when human perspectives might be relevant. There is one thing we need to discuss, Queen Eth said as the formal sessions concluded and the chamber began to empty. Earth's response to your new status. They want me to gather intelligence about Zephyrian military capabilities and political vulnerabilities, Marcus said. Also, they're concerned about the precedent this sets for future diplomatic relationships. Understandable concerns, and your personal feelings about these instructions. Conflicted. I swore an oath to serve Earth's interests, but I also just accidentally agreed to marry someone, which seems like it should take precedence over intelligence gathering. The two aren't necessarily incompatible. A strong human-Zephyrian alliance serves Earth's interests, and a successful marriage between us would cement that alliance more effectively than any treaty. Assuming it is a successful marriage, and not a diplomatic disaster waiting to happen. That, she said, rising from her throne with the fluid grace that never failed to catch his attention, depends entirely on whether we can figure out how to make this work as more than just a political arrangement. Any suggestions? Dinner tonight, just the two of us. No court officials, no diplomatic protocols, no political agendas. Her smile was warm enough to melt the crystalline architecture around them. Let's see if we actually like each other when we're not representing our respective civilizations. The emergency session in Marcus's quarters began at 3:47 hours ship time, when his personal communicator started broadcasting what he was learning to recognize as the distinctive sound of bureaucratic panic across multiple governmental agencies. Webb, what the hell did you do? Director Harrison's voice carried the special kind of exhaustion that came from being woken up to deal with interstellar crises. The entire diplomatic corps is in meltdown mode, and I've got senators demanding your immediate recall. I made a joke that turned out to be legally binding, sir, Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice professional despite the fact that he was wearing Zephyrian ceremonial pajamas that seemed to be adjusting their opacity based on his stress levels. And now the hardliners are screaming about human sovereignty, and the risks of entanglement with alien political systems. The connection crackled with the kind of interference that suggested Harrison was calling from a secure bunker somewhere deep beneath Geneva. They want you to formally reject the engagement and return to Earth immediately. What about the moderates? The moderates think you've just handed us the diplomatic coup of the century, assuming you can pull it off without triggering a war or accidentally signing away human independence. Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling the beginnings of what promised to be a spectacular headache. And Queen Astralith, any intelligence on how her government is handling this? That's where things get interesting. Our sources suggest the Zephyrian court is split between factions that see your engagement as either a brilliant strategic move or a dangerous precedent that undermines their traditional power, which means you've got Zephyrian nobles who are either celebrating the Queen's romantic independence or plotting to invalidate your engagement through legal challenges. The conversation was interrupted by what sounded like chimes made of crystallized light, followed by Queen Astralith's voice speaking through the room's communication system. "Marcus, we need to talk. Immediately." "I'll have to call you back, Director," Marcus said, cutting the connection before Harrison could object. Queen Astralith arrived within minutes, accompanied by what appeared to be a full security detail and an expression that suggested she'd been having her own series of emergency conferences. "How bad is it?" Marcus asked without preamble. "Politically catastrophic," she replied, dismissing her guards with a gesture and settling into one of the room's adaptive chairs. "3 noble houses are challenging the legitimacy of our engagement. Earth's hardliners are demanding your recall, and someone has leaked news of our situation to the galactic press." The galactic press? 17 different species news networks are currently running features on the human who accidentally married an alien queen. The coverage ranges from romantic comedy to political thriller, depending on the outlet. Marcus sat down heavily, trying to process the implications. "What are our options?" "Legally, we have 3 choices." She activated a holographic display that showed what appeared to be a decision tree with multiple branching paths. "First, we can complete the formal bonding ceremony within the next 72 hours. Which would make our marriage legally unassailable, but grant you access to Zephyrian succession codes and military command protocols." "Access to what?" "As my bonded consort, you would share certain royal privileges, including the ability to authorize defensive measures and access strategic databases." Her expression was carefully neutral. "Information that Earth's hardliners would definitely want you to gather, and that my court rivals would definitely want to prevent you from obtaining." "And the second option?" "We formally dissolve the engagement, you return to Earth, and we pretend this never happened. The political crisis resolves itself, but human-Zephyrian relations return to their previous state of careful mutual suspicion." "And the third option?" "We expose the fact that both our governments are trying to manipulate our relationship for political gain and forge our own path forward." She leaned forward, her skin shifting through colors that suggested intense concentration. "Marcus, I've been reviewing the communications intercepts from the past 24 hours. The marriage isn't just creating political opportunities. It's being actively exploited by factions on both sides who want to use it as justification for their own agendas." "Meaning?" "Earth's hardliners see your access to Zephyrian military secrets as a chance to gain strategic advantage. My court rivals see your foreign status as proof that I'm unfit to rule and should be replaced by someone more traditionally minded." She gestured at the holographic displays around them. "We're not just choosing between marriage and separation. We're choosing between becoming tools in other people's political games or finding a way to maintain our autonomy." "Is there actually a way to maintain our autonomy?" "There might be, but it would require public transparency about what we're being asked to do and a willingness to accept the consequences of refusing to play along with either side's expectations. The next few hours brought a series of increasingly urgent communications from both governments. Earth wanted Marcus to proceed with the formal bonding ceremony to gain intelligence access, while secretly maintaining loyalty to human interests. The Zephyrian court demanded immediate marriage to cement the alliance, while expecting Queen Eth to ensure that human influence remained carefully contained. "They all want us to be spies," Marcus observed as they reviewed the latest batch of instructions. "Your people want you to spy on Earth through me, and my people want me to spy on Zephyr through you, which suggests that neither side trusts us to act in their interests if we actually develop genuine feelings for each other." "Do we have genuine feelings for each other, I mean?" She was quiet for a long moment, studying the holographic displays that showed real-time political reaction across both their civilizations. "I know that I look forward to our conversations more than any other part of my day. I know that your humor makes even the most tedious court sessions bearable, and I know that when I imagine my future now, you're part of it. Even if it means dealing with political crises for the rest of our lives. Especially if it means dealing with them together rather than apart." Marcus looked around the chamber, with its impossible architecture and its walls that seemed to respond to their emotional states by shifting colors and patterns. 3 days ago, his biggest concern had been whether he'd remember the proper protocols for addressing Zephyrian nobility. Now he was contemplating marriage to an alien queen, while 2 interstellar governments tried to turn their relationship into a weapon. "Astrelith, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "If we do this, if we get married and refuse to spy on each other, and insist on making our own decisions about how to handle the political implications, what happens to the people who are counting on us to represent their interests?" "We represent their interests by proving that cooperation is possible without manipulation, that genuine partnership can exist between our species, and that trust is a more effective foundation for alliance than espionage." She smiled, and the room's walls seemed to brighten in response. "We show them that the future doesn't have to be built on the assumption that different peoples can never truly understand each other. That's either very wise or completely naive. It's probably both. But the alternative is spending the rest of our lives wondering whether our feelings for each other are real or just the result of political pressure and diplomatic necessity." Marcus stood up, pacing to the window that looked out over the crystalline spires of the Zephyrian capital. In the distance, he could see the launching ports where ships departed for Earth and dozens of other human colonies, carrying news of his accidental engagement to every corner of known space. "When you put it that way," he said, turning back to face her, "the choice seems obvious." The joint press conference was held in the Crystal Amphitheater, with representatives from 43 different news organizations, 12 planetary governments, and what appeared to be every major political faction in known space. Marcus had never seen so many recording devices in one place, and he was fairly certain several of them were using technologies that hadn't been invented yet. "Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished beings of various physiological configurations," Queen Eth began, her voice carrying across the amphitheater with the kind of presence that made even the most cynical reporters pay attention. "We've called this conference to address the recent developments in human-Zephyrian relations and to clarify our intentions going forward." Marcus stepped forward, trying to project confidence rather than the mild terror that came with addressing an audience that included representatives from civilizations capable of reducing solar systems to cosmic dust. 3 days ago, I made a joke that accidentally triggered the most significant diplomatic incident in recent galactic history, he said, and was gratified to hear what sounded like genuine laughter from several species whose concepts of humor he'd never understood. "Today, Queen Astrelith and I want to explain what we've learned about the political forces trying to exploit our situation." The response was immediate and electric. Recording devices swiveled toward them. Holographic displays lit up with breaking news alerts, and he could practically feel the collective attention of billions of beings across known space focusing on their words. Over the past 72 hours, Queen Eth continued, we have received instructions from various governmental agencies encouraging us to use our relationship as a means of gathering intelligence on each other's civilizations. We have been asked to serve as spies, manipulators, and political tools in service of agendas we had no part in creating. We're here to inform you that we decline these roles, Marcus added. We refuse to allow our relationship to be weaponized by factions seeking to justify their own political positions. The amphitheater erupted in questions shouted in dozens of different languages, but Queen Astrelith raised one graceful hand for silence. We will complete our formal bonding ceremony, she announced, but not as a political alliance or intelligence-gathering operation. We will marry because we choose to, and our relationship will be governed by our decisions rather than governmental directives. Furthermore, Marcus said, reading from prepared remarks that they'd spent hours crafting, we will establish new protocols for transparency in interspecies diplomatic relationships. All official communications between our governments will be matters of public record, eliminating the possibility of secret negotiations or hidden agendas. You're proposing to revolutionize diplomatic relations across known space, called out someone from the Galactic Tribune, based on a marriage that started as an accidental joke. We're proposing that authentic relationships might be more effective at preventing conflicts than carefully orchestrated political alliances, Queen Eth replied. And yes, we're basing this on personal experience. The next hour was a whirlwind of questions, challenges, and attempts by various reporters to find contradictions in their position. Marcus found himself fielding inquiries about everything from the legal implications of interspecies marriage to the psychological effects of accidentally proposing to alien royalty. The question from the Centauri Daily Beacon, he said, pointing to a reporter whose bioluminescent patches were flashing in patterns that his translation implants suggested were the equivalent of urgent attention-seeking. You asked whether we're concerned about the precedent this sets for future diplomatic relationships. We hope it sets a precedent, Queen Eth answered. We hope it demonstrates that cooperation between different species can be based on mutual respect and genuine understanding rather than strategic manipulation and careful power balancing. But what about the practical concerns? This from someone representing the Earth Colonial Authority. How do we maintain human sovereignty if our diplomats start marrying alien heads of state? The same way the Zephyrian Empire maintains its sovereignty, while its queen marries a human liaison officer, Marcus replied. By recognizing that partnership doesn't require surrender of identity, and that cooperation can coexist with independence. And if this approach fails, if transparency and genuine relationship prove insufficient to prevent conflicts, then we'll have proven that the cynics were right, and future generations can return to the old methods with clear consciences, Queen Eth said. But we believe the risk of failure is worth taking, if success means building something better than what came before. The formal bonding ceremony took place 3 weeks later, after the initial political uproar had settled into more manageable levels of ongoing controversy. Representatives from both governments attended, though Marcus suspected most of them were there to gather intelligence rather than celebrate romance. I still can't believe this started with a joke, he murmured to Queen Astrelith as they stood before the assembled witnesses, preparing to take vows that would be broadcast to every inhabited world in known space. The best relationships usually do, she replied, her skin glowing with colors that conveyed joy, nervousness, and something that looked like anticipation. Besides, what's life without a little accidental romance? The ceremony itself was a blend of human and Zephyrian traditions, with elements borrowed from 12 other species, whose representatives had insisted on contributing to the proceedings. Marcus found himself making promises in languages he'd never heard of, to a woman whose biology was fundamentally different from his own, while surrounded by beings whose existence proved that the universe was far stranger and more wonderful than anyone had imagined. Do you, Marcus Webb of Terra, accept Eth of Zephyr as your bonded partner, with all the joy and chaos that such partnership entails? I do, he said, and meant it more than he'd ever meant anything in his life. Do you, Astralith of Zephyr, accept Marcus Webb of Terra as your bonded partner, with all the humor and humanity that such partnership entails? I do, she replied, her voice harmonizing with the crystalline architecture around them in ways that made the entire amphitheater ring like a bell. 6 months later, the Webb-Astralith Accords had been signed by 17 different civilizations, establishing new standards for transparency in interspecies relations. The marriage itself had become a model for diplomatic partnerships based on genuine understanding rather than political calculation. Any regrets? Queen Astralith asked one evening as they watched the sunset from their shared balcony, her 4 arms wrapped around him in a configuration that still amazed him with its perfectly natural